So welcome everybody. We're very glad you're here and thank you for joining us tonight. And my name is Lisa Meltzer Penn. I'm past president for the California Writers Club San Francisco Peninsula branch and author of the novel The Siren Dialogues, which is currently unpublished, but hopefully for not too much longer. I'm excited to be here tonight in conversation with Abigail Hing, the author of the fabulous Loveboat series, which I devoured, I have to say. I loved them. I was up until midnight the other night because I have to finish the book. Not only because of this event, but because I had to know how it came out in the end, and the characters were so much fun to follow. So I'm really excited to be in conversation with you tonight. And before we begin, I'm just going to put in a little plug for another library event on October 20th. There'll be an event on authentic Indian cooking with your Instant Pot with Vasante Badkamkar Balan, and I'm sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly. So that's a totally different kind of event. But tonight we will be talking about the Loveboat series, and your microphone and video will be turned off if you're in the audience, but please feel free to use the chat and submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A. So put anything else in chat, but if you have actual questions for the author, then they should go in the Q&A. And for those who'd like access to live closed captions for this event, click on CC, then show subtitle. So tonight, San Mateo County Libraries welcomes Abigail Hing. Abigail is a best-selling author, a rare woman in tech leader specializing in artificial intelligence, which I know she uses for her character, a filmmaker, as well as a mother of two. Her young adult novel, Loveboat Taipei, made the New York Times bestseller list. Yay, very exciting. And the story picks right up in the sequel with Loveboat Reunion. She holds a BA from Harvard, a JD from Columbia, and an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. In her tech career, she's negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Today, she lives with her family here in the Bay Area while executive producing the film adaptation of Loveboat Taipei. I'm very glad to be with you here tonight, Abigail. And I'm wondering if you would like to do a brief introduction of Loveboat Taipei and Loveboat Reunion and read us a little selection from one of them.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for doing this with me, and thank you to everyone who's joined. Like I said, I'm in Austria, so I love just being able to chat with folks back home. So as mentioned, I am the author of Loveboat Taipei. It came out in January of 2020, and Loveboat Reunion, which came out in January of 2022, so just this past year. And while I have you here, since I'm in Austria, I actually have copies of a lot of my foreign editions. So this is the Russian edition.
Wow.
Edition. And the UK Australia edition. So it's like the same cover, but this really cool blue font that pops against her skin tone. So I love just seeing all the different ones. I don't have all of mine. It's out in Portuguese, Romanian, the Spanish version is coming, and I think the Chinese version just came out too. So,
oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun, and there's more coming. So I will just start off by reading a little bit from Loveboat Reunion. So I know that some of you have already read the first book, so I'm going to just kind of give you a hint at the second if you haven't picked it up yet. So it begins with Xavier, who's one of the fan favorites from book one. And what I'll do is I'll summarize book one for those who haven't had a chance to read it. But book one is about Ever Wong, who's an 18-year-old girl from Ohio. She is sent by her parents, kicking and screaming, to Taiwan to learn Chinese language and culture. But what she finds instead is the summer free-for-all. It's actually a summer program where the kids basically have no parental supervision. They're dropped off in this foreign country, and they just kind of go wild. They sneak out clubbing, they drink snake blood sake. But they also do learn language and culture and learn to make it their own. So along the way, she meets 30 different kids. She meets like hundreds of kids, but there's like 30 kind of that are circling her. And 4 main characters. 2 of them ended up as the main characters of Loveboat Reunion. So the beginning starts with Xavier at the Loveboat Talent Show and Auction, which those of you who've read book one will recognize. I went backwards in time just a bit for this one. National Theater, Taipei, August 8th. When your life has been a series of fuck-ups, it's hard to believe any one thing will actually go your way. But now I'm backstage behind the velvet curtains, watching Sophie try to auction off my mural to 2,000 people, and a weird hope beats in my chest. Now for tonight's final item, Sophie gestures a hand at my painted dragon, hung high in the backdrop from my stage wing to hers. An electric fan makes him ripple and fly like he's sprung to life. He's all shades of green, like wet grass, peacock feathers, the ocean, and mint, like the mountains of Taiwan and the coolness under a leafy tree. At least that's what was in me when I painted him into existence. This dragon is the work of an anonymous Chenton student. The microphone lifts Sophie's voice over a blur of faces in the audience. She smooths a stray lock from her mass of black hair, which is swept off her neck and pinned with a silver clasp. Notice the impossible number of hues in its scales, the power of its wings. Somehow she's making it sound real. When my whole life Ba told me not to waste my time with art. Once he melted my pastels into a puddle and left them to harden on my desk. But this summer I got brave and started to draw again. This dragon is the biggest thing I've ever done. I've never felt so exposed, way worse than if I ran naked across the stage. Do I hear 3,000 NT? Sophie asks. To my surprise, several white paddles rise into the night. $100 for a smear of green, blue, and gold pastels. 6,000? Sophie asks. 12,000? Picture this impressive dragon guarding the halls of your office. Sophie was born to command an audience. The numbers climb, making me dizzy with their speed. I couldn't believe someone was willing to fork over $100 US. Now there are several someones willing to pay 7, 8, 9. At $1,000 US, Sophie is down to 3 bidders. I crane my neck to see them. The darkness obscures a woman standing in the balcony, a man in the back, and another to the side, unbelievably still raising their paddles. At $5,000 US, the man to the side drops out. And sold at 200,000 NT, Sophie cries to the man in the white jacket. Thank you, sir, and congratulations. Please meet me at stage right after the show to claim your mural. The applause vibrates the floorboards beneath my feet. I nearly spill onto the stage, trying to follow the spotlight as it searches the faces for the guy who shelled out over 7,000 US for my anonymous dragon, almost as much as the rest of the auction made tonight. A supporter of the arts, or just someone who liked what he saw. The spotlight stops on a man in a snow-white jacket and pants, head and shoulders erect with a familiar military bearing. He takes a seat again, raising one modest hand to acknowledge the applause. Wait, I know him. It's Ba. Oh, so Lisa, I think you're on mute, actually.
Sorry, I was just muting during your reading. The action just amps up and continues all through this book. It is just delightful to read. And I have to admit, I used to be an editor for young adult books in New York. And I worked on a whole big series that reminded me in some ways of this, but you do a great job of it. I was very impressed. And
that's actually my first one that I've ever read, like out loud. We just don't normally do that. So thank you for listening.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great. I love hearing authors read from their work. And I have a confession to make as well, because I really related to these books because I met my husband on a similar program, on a teen tour to Israel. So I just...
Birthright program.
Excuse me?
Is it called the Birthright program?
No, it was actually, it was, oh my gosh, how can I be blanking on the name? I will come back to that later. But we were together for 6 weeks in the summer during high school, and it was nifty. But anyway, so I really related to these. So I have lots of questions for you to start us off. So Reunion shows us what happens to Xavier and Sophie right after their study trip on the Loveboat in the first book. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how their Loveboat trip changed them before this book begins. Because as you said, it does pick up right where you left off, but we're in different characters' points of view, and a lot of stuff happens along the way.
Yeah. So in book 1, Ever Wong is the main character. She's the girl from Ohio, and her roommate is Sophie Ha. And what she finds when she meets Sophie Ha is this like really intimidating girl. She's beautiful. She's a cheerleader. She's going to Dartmouth. She's studying computer science. And she's really boy crazy. And so at first, Ever's like, okay, she's just boy crazy. That's cool. Like, we're on Loveboat. Why not? But as we get deeper and deeper into Sophie's character, we realize there's actually a dark, bad seed at the core of why she's so boy crazy. Like, she is on Loveboat to find a rich guy to marry to support her family. And at first, everyone thinks she's just joking, but as it turns out, she really does believe that this is her destiny. This is what she needs to do to fulfill her purpose in life. And so for her, Loveboat actually is this rude awakening, because she goes through a series of heartbreaks, lots of romantic relationships that just didn't turn out right. And in the end, she realizes she has so much more to bring to the table. And so book 2 is her beginning her life at Dartmouth. She gets to start all over with a clean slate. She's swearing off boys completely, and she's going to double down and be the best computer science major that Dartmouth has ever seen. But of course, she continues to get in her way. We can talk more about that in a bit. And Xavier, for those who read, he actually had undiagnosed dyslexia for most of his life. So he has a secret. He's in this really high-performing group of Asian Americans. It's a very selective program. A lot of them are going to these Ivy League schools, Berkeley, other UCLA top universities. And here he is. He actually can't even graduate from high school, and that's kind of his secret. He actually can't even read because he managed to hide under the radar for so many years with he had a very non-traditional education in Taiwan with a tutor who just never figured it out. And so at the start of book 2, having come through his own heartbreaks over the summer, his father has forced him to repeat senior year of high school. All his friends are off to college. He is at Harvard Westlake in Los Angeles, and he was counting on inheriting his trust fund that his mom left when she passed away, and he was supposed to get that when he turned 18. But at the last minute, his father pulls the rug out from under him and is like, you are not getting your trust fund until you graduate from high school. And so now he's stuck. And he and Sophie end up teaming up to try to take control of their own lives, and they find themselves back in Taiwan on another Loveboat adventure.
Which is so much fun. So I'm wondering if you remember what it was like for you right after your Loveboat trip experience in your real life, and what changed for you those first few months, if you want to talk about any of that.
Absolutely. No, it was a really amazing trip. So I was a U.S. presidential scholar in high school, and the Taiwanese government actually went through the list of these scholarships, like the Cook Scholar. There was, I think, the Westinghouse, which is now the Google Science Scholarship now. And everyone with a Chinese last name would get this trip for free. So I had no idea. I had never heard of the Loveboat. And I was like, cool, why not? Free trip to Taiwan. So I showed up with some of the other presidential scholars that I'd met the previous summer in Washington, D.C. And lo and behold, we found out it was actually this summer this Loveboat program where parents would send their kids to find a spouse. And there's a lot. It was kind of a
so the parents were aware of that.
Some of them were.
Okay.
I was warned right before I got there. Actually, like someone was like, "Isn't that Loveboat that you're going on?" I was like, "What?"
So when you first heard about the program, it wasn't called officially Loveboat,
it was called like the Overseas Chinese Language and Cultural Training Program. So it sounds very legit, and it is. But I think it was really eye-opening for me, as it is for everyone, to just meet other Asian Americans who are so proud of their culture. Like I remember we'd drive around and they would just gush about the street food and like the places where they would go visit their aunts and their relatives, and I was so jealous because they would go and like come back with all this amazing food. And then learning, I think, about the culture and the history and going to museums and just really immersing myself in that world. It was so healing for me because I had never really had that experience. I'd grown up in Ohio, I was a minority, but then when I went to Taiwan, I felt like, oh, my Asianness is erased. It's not the most interesting thing about me anymore. And that was a really unique and special experience. So I think those types of learnings I continue to take with me even now, that sense of integrating who I was culturally. And then there's also this rebellion piece that we can talk about later too.
And did you speak Mandarin before you went?
I had taken 1 year at Harvard, so my freshman year I studied, but
you didn't speak it growing up.
No, okay. No, I was kind of the generation where your parents wanted you to learn English so that you could be in the country. I kind of envy my kids actually a little bit more bilingual than I am now because I've had them in immersion programs, and I wish I could speak other languages, but I speak a little French, and now that I'm in Austria, I'm learning a little bit of German, but.
Are you there just for a short time, or are you there for a while?
I'm here for a bit. So I'm actually researching, it hasn't been announced yet, so can't be printed, but I'm actually researching the third Loveboat book.
Yes, that was one of my questions. I was going to save that for the end, but now we know.
And it has something to do with classical music, so it's another good reason to be here. And then I'm researching a fourth novel, and then I have a composer child he's the reason I'm here. He's studying composition here, so I just accompanying.
Do you want to say who will be featured in the third book, or is that a secret for now?
Yeah, I probably has said too much already.
Okay,
So
we won't ask that question then.
that's
Okay.
the newsletter. I'll send you all information as soon as I am allowed to.
Okay, sounds great, but that's very exciting. I'm very glad to hear that. I will be first on the list to get the copy. Okay, question about Sophie in Loveboat Reunion. So she has a lot of pushback for her ideas being not tech enough. This is when she's in her AI class and trying to, get her proposal. She's not actually in it, she's on the wait list. So she's told she's not tech enough and she's too feminine. Her ideas are too fluffy. What are some of the real life stories that inspired her character and some of these things that she's dealing with and interested in?
Yeah, so I think a lot and speak a lot about women's leadership. So my career in technology in Silicon Valley, I was in venture capital for a bit, and we found that women were not being funded, and they still today are not being funded at the same rates as all male teams, like all female teams. I think it is a very, very small percentage. And we found like the questions that women founders were being asked were very different than the ones men were being asked. So like the men, oftentimes it was the venture capitalists who were mostly men would say like, oh, I get a good vibe from this team. I trust them. They don't know what they're doing yet, but they'll figure it out. They're smart guys. And for the girls, it was like, I don't know if they have enough numbers to back them up. Like, I don't really
Mm-hmm.
see hardcore stuff there. And so I think this is systemic and actually working in artificial intelligence, where there were these iconic headlines of an AI algorithm that did not equate women with leadership roles. What that actually did was just reflect what's historically been happening, but it actually highlighted it in a way that sometimes it was hard to tell. Like sometimes you get a vibe like, did I not get that because I was a woman? You didn't really know. But then once we actually saw the way the algorithms were processing all the data, we could say, no, there was this long-term systemic pattern. And for myself, I did not experience the glass ceiling for women when I was first starting out, because I think we all went to law school in equal numbers. We were hired into the workforce in equal numbers. But it wasn't until I had kids and I started moving into leadership or trying to move into leadership that I started to hit that ceiling. And there was like a point, and I've spoken about this, about I'd gone out for two promotions at the same time, and I was turned down for one because I wasn't as technical as the guy, and the other one I was turned down because I was not as supportive as the guy. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm so supportive that no one
Not
knows
as
what I do.
supportive,
I
really?
was not supportive enough, right? So I think those are just like, so that's something I think a lot about. Like, what are the ways that our expectations of women, of minority groups in general, like, what are the ways our expectations hold them back, and keep them from being able to like be who they are and present themselves. So Sophie's journey as a girl in tech is my way, I think, of exploring some of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think kind of coming back to your point, like her professor at Dartmouth is pushing back on her ideas. He never comes out and says, no, these are too girly. He pushes back with the same types of like what seem to be gender neutral questions, but they're not really. Like at the
Mm-hmm.
core, he just doesn't trust her. And that's, I think, some of what I'm trying to address
Mm-hmm.
there.
Well, while we're on that topic, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated how throughout, especially throughout Loveboat Reunion, you really worked with girls and women in empowerment. And I love those aunties that you have in the book. And I know not everyone has read it yet, so I won't say too much, but there's some kick-ass aunties in this book
Oh,
who do some really cool things. And the girls in the book, really just step into their power, and it's just great to watch. So let's see. You talked a little bit about Xavier's struggles with his learning disability and his controlling father, and how those things kind of feed into each other and make things even worse for him. And I'm wondering what went into telling that story.
Yes, so with Xavier, he has, as I mentioned, it was undiagnosed dyslexia. And then actually, as you find out in book two, there's even more going on than meets the eye. Like there's a reason why he struggled so hard to learn to read and to write essays. And at the same time, he has the weight of this enormous empire. His father and his grandfather, the founder of this enormous Taiwanese empire that he's expected to take over at some point. And so that, his dad is controlling because he thinks his son is a screw up. Plus his mother passed away when he was 12. And so I think his dad just has this chip on his shoulder that he's not being a good father. And so that ends up, translating in the form of really cracking down on Xavier. And I saw this in certain communities that just weren't ready to accept the existence of learning differences. I think so, like just the way that some people's brains work differently. And I think when you're more neurotypical, or when like someone who's neurotypical, it's harder to understand, like, someone else's brain may, not the same way. And so for, dyslexia, I think we're a little bit more familiar with now as a culture. But there was, there are still other cultures where that was harder to accept. And so for many years, Xavier's father just wished his dyslexia would go away. And he'd just feel it away if he worked hard enough, and that actually wasn't the case. So that's something that Xavier has to learn to reckon with, and the fact that he never got the help that he needed his entire life.
Yeah, so that was a big thing for him. And then some of the other characters, they had, they weren't confident in their abilities in other ways, where they saw their certain aspects of their personality as a detriment. And it took their friends pointing out, like, no, that's a good thing. That's something that is one of your strengths. And I really appreciated that. And there we had Ever gaining confidence in her abilities. And then, Sophie thinking she's a tornado and just causes havoc everywhere she goes. And then, she's told, what, that's actually a great thing because you make things happen. And it's how it's channeled that can make the difference. And of course, you throw lots of obstacles in their path, and everyone makes the wrong choice along the way, which makes it fun because as a reader, I'm like, no, don't do that. It's going to get you into trouble. And then, Xavier you have a group of kids who's like super talented and super smart in all kinds of different ways, not just book smart kind of ways. And we have, Sophie has this great quote. She says, "This is one of the qualities I love about clothes, how the right outfit can transform you into your best self." So she actually has this thing what people wouldn't necessarily think of as a quality that would matter so much, but it's the clothes transform you into your best self. And for her, that is one of her superpowers. So I felt like you did a great job of mixing the telling, the showing, and the action, so we really get to know these characters and to see their development as you go along. And I'm curious how you decided to portray them to the reader this way, and how you chose which characters to present as the point of view characters, because there's a lot of other people in the background, but you chose these ones.
So when I wrote the original Loveboat book, I wrote it from 4 points of view, from Ever, Sophie, Rick, and Xavier, and it was alternating among the 4 of them. And I even had some Jenna chapters. So Jenna is Rick's ex-girlfriend. And at 120,000 words, I just could not make this story work. And I couldn't figure out what was the problem. It just felt really shallow and hollow. And I realized it was too much story for one book. So I ended up, that was draft 26 that I just scrapped entirely, started over from the ground up. Ever's point
you said draft 26, right?
Draft 26.
And then you started over. Okay.
Thing from just Ever's point of view, first person, present tense.
Yeah.
And it worked. Like this time it worked. And because I knew the characters so well, because I basically written the book 5 times, from their point of view, it really, I think, helped me just navigate that world and know exactly how the characters were going to react to her, and how their storylines would kind of merge with hers. But I had all this leftover story afterwards, and that's a lot of what kind of informed book 2. I knew that I wanted to write more about Xavier in particular, because there's so much of his story that we didn't get on the page. And then, it made sense for Sophie to come along on the journey with him. So Sophie, actually, it's not in the book, but she probably has undiagnosed ADHD, which is actually common for minority girls to just kind of slip under the radar, because sometimes they're just like they're just kind of quietly like daydreaming and not noticed, or people might attribute their behavior to being from a different culture when actually it's actually just ADHD. But Sophie's learned to manage, and she does learn to manage that.
Great. And you bring a lot of issues to these books. We have the usual conflicts between teens and their parents. We've got bullying, harassment, sexual equality issues, standing up for yourself and your friends, forgiveness, which is a big one. I know it's hard for all of us, whatever our age, and you find a lot of strength in the weaknesses. And did you intentionally set out to deal with all of these issues, or did they just kind of come in as you were writing?
Yeah, they just came in. Yeah, I think it's just, I really want to just be true to my characters and who they were, and I think these are the things that happened. And sometimes people ask, like, how can you write a happy story that has so much sadness too? And I think that's just the experience that they know my characters have gone through. Like they've seen their parents go through racism. They've seen their parents hit glass ceilings and bamboo ceilings, and that's just a part of their lives. At the same time, they fall in love. They have crushes. They have dreams and of things that they want to do, and they have friendships. And so I think it's just all part and parcel of the total humanity of my characters. And I think for me, that was the most important thing, is to really show them in as well-rounded, complete human beings.
Mm-hmm. With access to private jets.
Yes, only Xavier. Xavier is the only one.
Right. Okay, so what do you hope your Loveboat series means to young readers? And did you find books like this when you were growing up?
Yeah, so one of the most special comments to me was from one of the girls on my marketing team at HarperCollins, Jane Lee, who is now working with Reese Witherspoon's book club.
Mm.
And when I first met her, she said she had read my book 3 times and had never felt so seen before. And I think that really struck me, because like that's what I think that's what I wanted. I didn't know I wanted until she said that. And like that's what I want people to do, is like they read this book and like, oh, I could see myself in these characters, and to know that your story matters and that you can be a main character of a story, and that the things that you struggle with are notable. Like so, these some of the threads and the themes that I talk about, I never read about in books growing up. And I remember for a long time, I think that's what prevented me from writing a book like this, is I just didn't know that was a book. I didn't know that that was interesting audiences, or I think it wasn't Jane Eyre or Jane Austen, or like the other books that we read in English class. So I think for me, it was filling a gap that I didn't have when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. And as a reader, it's interesting reading about this place, because these characters are suddenly in a place where they're not minorities. And as a reader, I get to be the minority in that place as I'm reading, like, oh yeah, these, I'm the one who's different here, if I think of myself in that environment. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how your experiences working in Silicon Valley influenced your writing career? You talked a little bit about it before with the AIs, or anything else you want to say about it?
So Sophie, as I mentioned, she's a girl in tech. She's not a girl in tech in book one. In book one, she's just girl boy crazy. In book 2, she wants to build a fashion app. And actually, she takes an artificial intelligence class, which to her is like, wow, that's like really hardcore. She goes in, but she finds out there's mostly guys in the class. There's not that many women, not that many girls. And she is still herself, which means she just still loves clothing. And so when she's given kind of this open-ended assignment to build some kind of AI tool, she wants to build an AI fashion tool that will help people find clothes that fit them. And that's the project that her professor is just really skeptical about. And he has so many different reasons why it's not going to work. But she loves it. She's passionate about it, and she charges forward with it. And so I think for me, working in venture capital for 12 years and just seeing all the different startup companies come through the pipeline, I loved that. I love seeing the innovation, the new technologies. I think artificial intelligence is so fascinating. The things that it can do, the things it's already doing for our lives. It's already in our homes and our phones and our smart devices and our cars. But I think it's like a really incredible tool. But as it's being built, it needs to be built in a way that keeps in mind, who's going to be using this. And as I mentioned, that headline about an algorithm that didn't correlate girls with leadership roles. There's a lot of ways that technology can be built in a way that harms other people. And it's not just a matter of safety. Safety is the most important thing. If you put out a self-driving car that hits people, that's a problem. But if you put out a self-driving car that doesn't identify people as people because of the color of their skin or some other quality about them, then that's also harmful. And that needs to be, those types of things need to be thought about at the ground level. So same things with when you use artificial intelligence for prison sentencing guidelines or recidivism rates or anything that's relying on historical data that may actually reflect human biases. Like those are things that we need to think about. So I think some of those ethics in AI are things that I'm also exploring in some of the other writings that I've got in the pipeline too.
And so I heard you left your corporate job last year. So I'm wondering how life has changed for you since then. And I've also heard some talk about a movie.
Very excited. Yeah. So Loveboat Taipei is we wrapped filming. We've already
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah. So We cast, I think, in August of last year. So Ashley Liao is playing Everwong. Ashley actually was also just cast in the Hunger Games. So I'm going to go see her in a bit.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, and Ross Butler is playing Rick Wu. Nico Hiraga plays Xavier, and Chelsea Zhang plays Sophie Ha. And we have just this fabulous cast. We were in Taiwan filming over like November, December, wrapped in January, and I just can't wait to share this film with the world. It's been so much fun.
That's so exciting. And I mean, what I thought was really funny was in Loveboat Reunion, you actually have a short film in there, which I could, I mean, you can see it unfolding. I mean, I could see it as a film, so I hope that's in there somewhere because you've already written the entire thing. It was pretty cool. Let's see. We talked a little bit about your 26 drafts and your study program. So I'm wondering, do you and Ever have the same taste in musicals, and do you and Sophie share an interest in fashion?
Yes, absolutely. With the musicals, I can't remember exactly what's in the book. I think it's Greatest Showman. Um, Probably, I don't know if Les Mis is in there, but for me, it's Greatest Showman, Les Mis. I grew up on those. Now that I'm in Vienna, I've been watching a lot of opera, so I've kind of seen some of the classics, but I still like go back to those old favorites. And Hamilton is another big one, but I don't think Hamilton made it into Loveboat.
Hmm.
And then clothing, yes, I do actually love clothing. I have friends that are really, really fashiony, so I don't really think of myself in that, that genre. But I think just the colors that Sophie and Xavier both like, and that's actually one of the things that connects them, is something that's always been fun for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do a really good job with the fashion. So maybe, I don't know if you channeled your friends for their characters, but that was pretty wild. The stuff that they were wearing, it was a lot of fun. I know I can't say too much because we can't have spoilers, but there's a lot of high fashion in there. Okay, let's see. I have lots more questions. People should please start submitting questions because in a few minutes we are going to go to the audience Q&A. And if you've put them in the chat, please put them in the Q&A as well so I can actually see them together. I will keep going with my questions for a few more minutes. I wanted to ask how you decided to characterize the parents of these kids in the way you did, because their opposition to their children mobilizes the young people to figure out what they really care about, and not always in expected ways. I'm thinking of Ever's parents in book 1 and Xavier and Sophie's parents in book 2. And can you talk about how parental expectations help shape the story and these characters? And I just wanted to read a little quote before you answer from Loveboat Taipei. This was Ever. She says, before I left home, I knew what my life was. Med school, my parents never measuring up daughter, pining after Dan from afar. Then today, for one perfect afternoon, I'd had something else, a future in dancing, a family that accepted me, a boyfriend I admired and respected, and none of it was real.
Yeah, so one of the responses to the book coming out that I loved the most was from the South China Morning Post, and they wrote that Loveboat Taipei was the first young adult Asian American novel where the kids came to a deeper understanding of their parents. And I love that. I was, that's the parents start off with these. There's a fracture, there's a rift between Ever and her parents. Like I said, they send her to Taiwan kicking and screaming. They've taken dance away from her. They expect her to go to med school, and she's too afraid to tell them what she really wants. And frankly, if she did tell them, they probably would say no and discourage her. And her mom does. Her mom kind of tears up some of her hopes and dreams on the dance side. And similarly, Xavier, Xavier's family has very high expectations for him, his dad especially, and Sophie. Her family expects her to marry well. So there is a weight of expectation that they're all experiencing. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure the parents weren't kind of a stereotypical overbearing parent. Because I think what I found, my editor actually at HarperCollins is Italian American. And she's like, my family's just like Ever Wong's family. And I think what I found is that it's really like high performing families or families that value education. Like they're the same across all cultures. Like you value education, which means you want your kids to do well in school and study hard and work hard. And those are good values. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But when it gets too much, when the kid can't define who they are, when the kid doesn't even know who they are, I think that's a problem. It's a part of the story is like figuring out what is my identity? Who am I really? Who do I want to be? But you know, at the same time, like Ever's father, he kind of balances out the mother, and this, like, the mother is probably the more overbearing one. The father, actually, as a physician, is very open-minded about dyslexia, because Ever's little sister also has dyslexia. And so in that way, they're inverted. Like, Ever is the open-minded one because she's equipped by her dad to be open-minded about dyslexia and how you can use tools to, you know, to work on reading skills and so forth. So you know, and then similarly, Sophie's family with the auntie, like there's a deeper story with the auntie in book 2 where we get to know them a little bit more, and there's a love story between the auntie and her husband. So I think just being able to showcase a little bit more of the different sides of their personality was important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And it's also kind of classic hallmark of teens to see their parents as black and white and be in opposition to them. So it was nice when the characters really kind of came to see the other sides of them and understand them better. And because they really grow up a lot in these books. So let me just check the time. I have time for one more question before we go to the audience questions, and keep them coming in, everybody. I'm just curious a little bit about how you approach usage of Mandarin in here. And you did give us a lot of Mandarin in the book. Well, at least it was a lot for me. And the fact that it's a language that's depicted in characters rather than letters like we're used to, it's very different. And I know that posed various problems for Xavier. But did you want to say anything about how like having been in this program and having grown up, even though you didn't grow up with the language when you were a kid, just how that influences how people view the world or their understanding of things? And
yeah,
I'll just
absolutely.
leave it there. You could answer it however you see fit.
So at the time that I was publishing Loveboat Taipei, there wasn't a lot of precedent for including Chinese language in English language books. And so I was kind of making up the rules as I went along. I decided to write in pinyin, so not the characters. There may be some characters in the second book. And
I think you talk about the characters a lot too, and they're really done artistically in a lot of ways. So.
Right, which they were originally, like Chinese characters are pictorial. But I decided to use pinyin, and I decided to use the accent marks. And so those were kind of two choices that I made. But I didn't use accent marks on common Chinese words that we know in the States, like chi pao or dim sum. And then there was a difference between like some of the older Taiwanese style of pinyin translations and kind of the modern version. And so I had to make choices around that too, because Chentan actually is an older version, but I wanted to use the actual name, Chentan. So I did write a little author note at the back, kind of addressing some of the choices that I made, but I've since like seen lots of other books kind of approaching it in different ways. I've seen Chinese characters in books. I think I may include a character in one of my feature stories. And I think there's not any right way to do it, but for me, I think the key was like Ever Wong grew up like I did, surrounded by Chinese language that she didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And you kind of get the gist sometimes, like if it's like common things like let's go, or like food ordering, like things that are common everyday things, even if you don't really fully understand it, like you know kind of what people are talking about. And so I kind of included bits and pieces here so that sometimes she's totally in the dark about what people are saying, and my readers are in the dark too if they don't understand Chinese. And sometimes there's just a little bit there with a little bit of English translation that she does kind of get the gist. And so I think that was the experience that I was trying to replicate on the page as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, I'm going to jump to some audience questions because we have some coming in. A question from Anne. She says, I haven't finished Loveboat yet, but I heard the reading from Reunion that Ever painted a dragon. Although that's not quite accurate. Does Ever get to study dance?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. So let me clarify that I was reading from Xavier's point of view. So that was actually Xavier who painted the dragon. And does Ever get to study dance? Oh, I don't want to ruin it if you haven't finished reading, but I think everyone gets what they need. That's actually when you write a book, like from a craft perspective, your characters should get what they need, not necessarily what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good answer. Stella asks, what are your major literary influences?
Yeah, so I love that question. I grew up, with like Laura Ingalls, C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. I read a lot of high fantasy because I think I related a little bit more to these people from other worlds than I did to some of I never graduated to sitcoms on TV, for example. I just couldn't see myself in them at all. And I actually read a lot of Nancy Drew. David Eddings was kind of my fantasy go-to. I didn't know about Tolkien. For some reason, I was just a David Eddings fan. And then, of course, all the books that we read in English class, like all the Shakespeare and the canon from British literature. I love Jane Austen. So I actually think Loveboat Taipei in some ways is, and Loveboat, Jane Austen-ish, and the Bible. So I think just I feel grateful to have been able to read so widely in the English language, but also a lot of translations of works. Since I studied French, we would read a lot of French literature, like Le Petit Prince and The Little Prince, and other books like Madame Bovary that we would read English translations of. So I'm just thankful for a diverse range of books to read.
Okay. And I know we have some steamy scenes in here, so Madame Bovary perhaps was a good influence for you. Okay. We have another question. Do you start writing with short stories? And what's your suggestion for those amateur authors who just started to write?
Yeah, so I love this. Is great craft question. I think you should just write. The story needs to be as long as it needs to be, and it's going to depend on the story. I personally think short stories are harder to write than a novel because they have to turn so quickly, and they're just so sharp and crisp, and often there's not as much time to do the characterizations. So for me, novels are actually easier because it gives me space to breathe and to run around in the world and explore and see how the characters going to interact with each other and with their environment. And so for beginning authors, beginning writers, read widely, read lots of genres, but read deeply in the genre that you're interested in writing in, and write a lot. I think people say it takes 10,000 hours, a million words, and it's unfortunately true. I was hoping to do it faster, but no, I was.
I can relate to that. For sure.
Writing before Loveboat Taipei published, so.
And I'm impressed that you were able to keep track of the number of drafts that you wrote, because I lost track of mine.
I label them version, number.
Yeah. I have another question in the chat. Kyla would like to know more about how you're approaching the film version. Are you combining both books into a movie, or is it just Loveboat Taipei? Which I guess you're done with the movie now, so you could definitely answer the whole question.
So the movie is Loveboat Taipei.
Okay, it is. All right. And will there be a Loveboat reunion one?
I hope so. So I think, it's you just never know with Hollywood. I think it has, I think the more word we get out in the books, the more chances are that there will be, more. But it's really hard to predict. But
yeah, I know.
For many more sequels.
Do you know when the movie will come out?
So there hasn't been a release date announced yet.
Okay.
But, I think someone put my website on there, but I will send out a note as soon as I know. So sign up for my newsletter on my website. And
okay, great. Let's see. Okay. Stella would like to know, what contemporary books or authors do you enjoy reading right now? And are they YA ones?
Yeah, so I read a lot of my critique partner's work. So my critique partner, Stacey Lee, has a new book that's not out yet. It's called Winston Chu. And so I've got the PDF version of it as well as an ARC. And so I'm excited to read that. I have a friend who's writing her debut novel. It's a fantasy that's just amazing. So I'm actually critiquing that right now for her. Gosh, I've read so many wonderful books. Oh, I just blurbed a book. I'm actually closed to blurbs, but this one, it was a graphic novel. I don't know if it's announced yet, but it was just this gorgeous middle grade graphic novel. Actually, it is announced. It's about a Korean American girl who goes back to Korea for her grandmother's funeral, and it was just incredible. I read it in one sitting. So yeah, I feel like there's this explosion of amazing novels in young adult and middle grade in general. So it's a really wonderful time to be writing in the space.
And I did read Stacey Lee's Luck of the Titanic. That was really good. And she had the best stamps she used to sign the book with. I went to her event at Kepler's. And yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, and I wanted to put a plug out too for Sabah Tahir's book, All My Rage, which came out this year and was just shortlisted for the National Book Award. So I'm so proud of her. So thrilled for it.
Yeah, that's great. Do we have more questions? I don't see any more in the box here, but we have more time.
Yeah, I see a question from Sam. Were there any books about that made me feel seen when I read them? Yeah, it's a really good question. When I was growing up, I didn't. That was the hard part. I loved Laura Ingalls. Like, I loved it so much. I wanted to live in Laura Ingalls' books. I loved her family, but I also knew that if I dropped into their world, I would be a strange kind of creature to them. Like
Mhm.
Ma, unfortunately, she was racist toward Native Americans, and I think I probably would have fallen in that category. And then Laura, I think, is as open-minded as can be, but even to her, I think I would have been a bit of a curiosity. And so that was painful for me to love something so much and then feel yet that I would not have been accepted. And so I think that's partly what drove me to write the books that I'm writing now.
Mhm. I actually visited the little house in the little house on the prairie town when they moved to the town. I visited the little place when I was going through South Dakota.
Oh, I'm totally dying to visit. I want to go
And
someday.
we got there a little bit late, so everything was closed. We kind of took our little self-guided tour and just peered in the windows. And the
Mm.
person in the gift shop referred to her father as Pa. They just called him Pa
Oh,
as if he was their own father.
I feel like there it is. You've dropped into her world.
Yeah. Let's see. Anything else in here? We still have a few. We still have a few more minutes. Okay. Oh,
Because I know
yes, there will be a recording of the event after the virtual talk. That was one question. And how do you come up with character names? That's a good question. How do you make your characters come alive? Do you pattern them on real people, or are they strictly figments of your beautiful imagination?
Oh gosh, so names, I think I've just run into them like all over the place. Ever I met a kid and I like love the name. My husband actually is Andrew and his sister is Julie, and they were named for Julie Andrews from Sound of Music. And so I kind of took that little bit and I turned Rick into Friedrich from Sound of Music, and his sister is Shelley from Sound of Music as well. But he goes by Rick instead of Friedrich. Um, yeah, and Sophie actually, here's a secret. She used to be Starlet,
Oh,
but yeah, it was just not like it was like too fluffy.
yeah, she gets
And
into enough trouble for people thinking she's
yeah,
fluffy
yeah, and
already, right?
it was just a little bit too, I don't know. It wasn't the vibe I wanted for her. So right at the last minute, I changed it to Sophie. And when I was talking to my agent at the time that I was deciding among agents, I kept talking about Starlet, and she's like, "Who's Starlet?" So
Starlet
um,
or Scarlet?
Starlet,
Okay, that's what I
Starlet.
thought you said. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and other real people. So they are figments of my imagination. I would say the internal journeys are a lot of them are they are drawn from my life or my family's life. But externally, like it's all just like different ideas that I've collected over the years, or just things that kind of come to me as I go along.
Mhm. Um, were there parts of the book from your other drafts that were hard to let go of, or are you just using them for other books?
Yeah, so when I was writing book two, I went through my old, draft 26 to see like what I wanted to mine from that. And actually, as I wrote book three, I did the same thing. I went back to that to see is there anything else that I really feel like needs to come. There's still a scene that I don't know if I'll ever use it. Again, I'll let you in on the secret. Book one used to end in the drowning scene where they all ended up in the ocean and they had a big fight and there was a typhoon, and that actually happened to me when I was on the boat. There was a big typhoon that kind of shattered all the glass. It was actually on a different campus over by the sea called Ocean, and a bunch of us went out to the dock afterwards, and we're just like not smart. We were just on the dock and the wave came crashing over us. And I remember in that moment,
Wow.
that's wow, we're totally out of control. So my original arc forever, when the title of the book was Breaking All the Wong Rules, was that she was just like rebelling, rebelling, rebelling. And then she rebelled and ended up in the ocean. So that was like one version, but it didn't work with the new version when I rewrote it just from her point of view. So that's gone. I don't know if it'll ever come back. I tried to put it in the third book, didn't fit there either. So maybe it'll appear in like a special edition or something.
The director's cut.
There's a Barnes and Noble version of Loveboat that does have extra scenes in it. It's
Oh,
deleted scenes
really?
that came out of the draft 26. But yeah, not that one yet, but not the drowning one.
Interesting. Um, okay, we have a few more questions. how did you decide how much to get into the geopolitics of Taiwan in your novels? I know that did come up a couple times in the first book, especially given that the historical political context has completely reshaped the Loveboat program with regime changes multiple times. Did that impact when the story was set? And actually, when was it set?
Yeah, yeah. So the story is set in the present day. I'm kind of like agnostic around the time period. I did think about like so Xavier's older relatives and Sophie's as well speak Japanese, and so I kind of did the calculation out of like how old they would be if Sophie and if everyone is basically 17 or 18 today or 19. I did not really get into the politics. There's a little bit in book one where when they visit Sophie's family, the uncles are debating like the politics of Taiwan and China,
And I think
and
those
so,
five boys who form that little group, they have
yes, oh,
different
that's true.
opinions about it too.
They're really, I think, thinking more about like reclaiming their Asian American identity.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Actually, Spencer does make some comments about that too. So I think it was more for me like wanting to reflect again the reality that when you go on a program like this, there are going to be kids talking about different issues and raising it. And then the same thing when you go visit your family, there's always someone in the family talking politics. And so it comes up in that sense. But for the most part, like I think of the story as a cultural story. It's a story about identity and family, food, and history.
Great. Let's see. Can you share any insight on the publishing process and lessons learned? Now, there's a big question.
Yes, so I have on my website, I have a frequently asked questions page where I kind of speak to some of this. So you go there for more information, but it is important to get an agent. For fiction, you have to write the whole thing, and it's because it's hard to make sure that it actually ends satisfactorily. If you're writing nonfiction, you can actually do just a proposal and like sample chapters and an outline maybe. It helps if you have a platform too for nonfiction, and then publishing. I think the key is really finding people who understand what you're trying to do. And that can take a really long time. It took me many years to find the right critique partners that understood, and vice versa, what we were trying to accomplish. And then it makes all the world of difference to have an agent and an editor who understand what you're trying to do. So I recently gave my editor at Harper, like my latest novel, and she read it and she started laughing with me about this one character. And I'm like, oh, you think that's like, I actually had other people read it and say, oh, this is really weird, take it out, but she just kept laughing about it. I'm like, thank you for laughing about it because that's exactly what was supposed to be funny, right? And so,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, just like it really, if people don't like your writing, it's like yes, maybe there's room to grow. There always is room to grow. We're constantly growing, but it also could be they just don't resonate with your writing and vice versa. And that's true. I mean, if you think about, you don't love all movies, you don't love all books. So I think just finding your tribe and being patient to finding your tribe is probably the biggest, most important thing you can do.
Yeah. Not just changing everything because someone says, here's my idea. Yeah. Let's see, we have time for a couple more. I have Kyla asking, not being a writer, but in marketing, I'm wondering if you set out thinking about a target audience, and if so, are the Loveboat stories for young adults? I would say yes, but also it sounds like you're moving to an older audience in your upcoming novels. I guess they are getting older.
Yes, I used to not actually understand the differences between the different genres. I just started writing and it turned out I was writing young adult. But for many years, actually, I was having a hard time with the teen voice. But for some reason, over time, my voice became a teen voice. Even now, I don't always know if my book is a middle grade, young adult, or adult book. I think it just depends on what the particular project is. And I think it's actually better to write for yourself first, that first draft, and that comes out, and then you can kind of figure out from there where you want to slot it. Older audiences, yes. So I do have some adult projects. I'm represented now by film managers, and so I'm working on some original TV scripts and feature film scripts, and those are more adult. And I'll probably be translating those to novels at some point as well.
So do you have your own film company?
I do technically, yes. It's still very early. I haven't really announced it yet, but I did start a production company to start to do some of this other producing work that I'm doing.
Great, that's exciting. Oh, and I just wanted to note that if you look in the chat, there's a link to Abigail's advice and frequently asked questions. So I won't try to spell out the web address. You can just go to the chat to find that. And do you have anything else you want to tell the audience tonight before we tie things up?
Yeah, so let's see. I see one other question about how realistic Ever's experiences are.
Oh yeah, sorry, I missed that one.
No worries. Yeah, I think that there are so many crazy stories that have come out of Loveboat. Like they're not even like they haven't made the books. Not everything's made it in. I um, I think having seen the girl, like there's a scene where Sophie is being chased by her horrible boyfriend. And he's like screaming and swearing at her down the hallway. And that happens. Like I think you have a bunch of young people together, and there are bad breakups sometimes, right? So I think some of,
Lots of
especially
drama.
yeah, lots of trauma, a lot of, but the sneaking out clubbing, that is quintessential Love Boat. People sneak out in many different ways. So I just went out the front doors with the counselors on our heels. My husband, who also went on Love Boat, was the one who climbed over the blue pipe. I did not even know this blue pipe existed until
And
he
you were
told me
there
about
different
it.
times, right? Different years.
Yes, it's still there. The blue pipe is still there. And then some people would climb over the wall. So in book 3, there's probably going to be some climbing over the wall because I didn't get that into the other ones. So yeah, a lot of the stories are actually drawn from kind of some of the quintessential things that happen on Love Boat.
Very fun. Oh, question about there's a question about the library copy to borrow the book or to keep. I'm not sure what that refers to. But you can order them to sign out from the library, I believe. Yeah. But anyway, so it is that time already. The link is to borrow. Okay, that's confirmed. Cool. So I just wanted to thank you, Abigail, for being here tonight. Well, being here in the middle of the night for you. It must be 4:30 in the morning now. I hope you get a little bit of sleep. This has been a fantastic conversation, and thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Please check out San Mateo County Library's upcoming author talks at smcl.org/author talks. And we would also appreciate if you could tell us how SMCL did with this program at smcl.org/rate this event. And have a great night, everybody. And thank you so much again for being here. And thank you, Abigail.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here as well. I will be in person in San Francisco at an event on November 2nd at Dynamica. So you can find the information on my website as well. So if you guys are in the Bay Area, come see me in person.
Oh, excellent. And you can get your book signed there or buy the books and get them signed. So and happy reading, everyone. These are really fun books. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Have a good night. Thank you, San Mateo.